Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska, get any updates to the forecast, or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, before we jump into the warnings, we do want to take a quick look at some of the records that we have set. We've had cold temperatures over much of the state, and we have set some records recently from some of those. In Anchorage, we had on April 10th, 5 degrees at 6:53 a.m., which beat the old record of 7 degrees set in 1985. In Cordova, we had 3 degrees at 6:53 a.m. That breaks the old record of 7 degrees set in 1968, also for April 10th. And then in Ilium on April 9th, we were down to -3, which ties the old record of -3 that was in 1985. Taking a look now at the warnings and advisories that we have out for the state, let's start off in the Alaska range. We do have a lot of winds expected to be channeling through a lot of the passes in the area. We'll start off with the western Alaska range. Specifically by Denali, we have a wind advisory out with gusts up to as high as 65 miles per hour expected. That is going to start at 7 a.m. on Sunday and then go until 7 a.m. on Monday. In the eastern portions of the Alaska range, we have a high wind warning out. We expect gusts to get up to as high as 70 miles per hour. That's going to start at 10 a.m. on Sunday and go until 10 a.m. on Monday. You notice all along the west coast we have several warnings and advisories that extend into the western interior as well. This is from a frontal system coming up that's bringing heavy snow and blowing snow to all of these locations. This is going to start most currently for the places around the Yukon Delta and Norton Sound area. Those are already in effect and they're going to go primarily until Sunday. The other ones farther to the north and farther to the east, so both for the Kotzebue Sound area as well as the western interior, those are going to start sometime on Sunday, with many of them going into Monday, the latest of which will be the one near Bettles that will last until Monday around 1 p.m. The blowing snow conditions for many of these could drop visibilities down to a half mile, down maybe even to a quarter mile or less at times, with those warning areas expected to have the lower visibilities closer towards a quarter, and the advisory areas expected to be closer towards a half mile. For snow amounts, we'll take a look at this next image. This is storm total snowfall that's going to start today and go into 1 p.m. on Monday. So we are going to see some amounts by St. Mary's up to 6 to 8 inches, as well as at Anvik. Galena also 6 to 8 inches, Ambler 6 to 8 inches, Gamble as well 6 to 8 inches. Highest amounts going to be by Nome 8 to 12, and between Galena and Anvik we will see a corridor of higher amounts getting up closer towards 18 inches in some of those locations. Taking a look now at what's going on in satellite imagery, we can see that big system out over the Bering Sea with the low there near the Pribilof Islands area. So we watch this again, we can watch the front track through the central Aleutians towards the eastern Aleutians. And one more time, we can watch out ahead of this cloud cover extending in over the southwest Alaska coastline. That's starting to bring that snow and blowing snow conditions to these locations. It is also bringing up quite a bit of warm air, so not all snow conditions as we get farther to the south. Out over mainland Alaska, you can see a lack of cloud cover where we have the high pressure that has helped bring us all of those cold temperatures over the last couple days. So now taking a look at the weather for the remainder of the day, we can see that main system out there over the Bering Sea with some colder air coming in behind it. Some snow for the western Aleutian Islands expected, a mix of rain and snow for the central Aleutian Islands, but out ahead of the cold front behind that warm front, we do have that warm air being pushed up from the south, bringing in some rain to the Alaska Peninsula. However, out ahead of that front, we do have heavier snowfall for southwest Alaska up to the Norton Sound area, and blowing snow conditions as we get closer towards the Yukon Delta, where we do have some of those stronger winds. That snow is going to extend through the rest of southwest Alaska, including Kodiak Island, and extend out over the western portions of south central Alaska. Much of the rest of the mainland is going to be held fairly dry by the high pressure still lingering out over the eastern border. Then down in the Panhandle area, we're going to see a mix of rain and snow, primarily snow at the higher elevations and areas farther to the north. As we move into tonight, we will still see some lingering snow showers over the Panhandle. However, those will be diminished from what we have been seeing today. We're going to see snow continue along the North Gulf Coast through south central Alaska. We'll start to see some heavier snowfall along the areas around Prince William Sound and along the North Gulf Coast. We're going to see more snow continuing in through the Alaska Range, through much of the west coast, and that snow is spreading farther to the north and east as we move through the nighttime hours. We will still see a lot of the blowing snow conditions from the Yukon Delta, western interior, and Seward Peninsula area tonight. Then down in the Alaska Peninsula area, we're still seeing some of the warmer air there with some rain expected. Behind the cold front, we are going to see more rain and snow mix for the eastern Aleutians, and then snow primarily for the central and western Aleutians as more cold air is funneled in from the north. As we move into Sunday, cold air extending farther to the east along the Aleutians. We're going to see snow throughout all of the Aleutian Islands on Sunday, with a mix of rain and snow expected for the Alaska Peninsula, and some of that mix is starting to push into the southwest coastline. However, ahead of that occluded front, we do expect to see the heavy snowfall around Norton Sound, western interior, and through the Kotzebue Sound area, blowing snow in all of those locations as well. Snow is going to extend out east through much of the rest of the interior and Brooks Range, and then down in the south central area where the heaviest snowfall will stay along the North Gulf Coast. Finally, down in the Panhandle area, mix of rain and snow for central locations, and more snow as we get closer towards the Lynn Canal. On Monday, continued precipitation for the Panhandle will extend farther to the east as well on Monday, where we will see a mix of rain and snow for much of the central and southern locations. More rain as we get farther to the south, more snow as we get farther to the north, and then all snow as we get into the northern locations of the Panhandle. You're going to see a rain and snow mix along much of the North Gulf Coast on Monday, and then snow throughout much of south central Alaska. Mix of rain and snow for some of the areas of southwest, however, it will be primarily snow for much of Monday. Then we're going to see more snow up the west coast through Utqiagvik and out through much of the northern interior and Brooks Range. Still some lingering areas of blowing snow, especially earlier on Monday for areas around Seward Peninsula extending up to the Chukchi Sea coastline. Then down in the Bering Sea, primarily snowfall, and we're going to see snow for much of the Aleutians as well. Taking a look now at our temperatures starting Sunday morning low temps, we'll look down in the Panhandle area, dropping down into the upper 20s, and then into the mid to upper teens as we get farther to the north with 17 at Yakutat. Along the North Gulf Coast, primarily in the mid-20s, then for Cook Inlet area in the teens, and then below zero for the Copper River Basin. Down at Kodiak, 35 degrees expected for that low. Up in the interior, it's going to be warmer in the southwest where we do have that influx of warmer air coming in, but below zero for most locations throughout much of the northern and eastern interior, with Arctic Village getting down to minus 28 degrees. Up along the Arctic coastline, primarily in the minus 20s, Dead Horse is going to be the coldest in the state Sunday morning at minus 29. Kotzebue Sound area will stay below zero as well, but Norton Sound area should be above zero, 10 degrees for Nome, and then 20 degrees as we get closer towards the Yukon Delta. As we look down in southwest Alaska, near freezing for much of the area around the Kuskokwim Delta, as well as Bristol Bay near the water. Colder as we get to interior locations in the 20s there. Down in the Alaska Peninsula in the mid-30s and mid to lower 30s for the Aleutian Islands, getting colder as we get farther to the west following that cold front. For Sunday afternoon highs, starting off in the Panhandle area near 40 degrees for southern locations, staying in the lower to mid-30s in the northern locations. 30s all around south central Alaska, getting warmer as we get farther to the south, 40 degrees for Kodiak. Then up in the interior, getting to at or above freezing for southern locations of the interior, and then in the teens as we get to the northern locations of the interior. Up along the Arctic coastline, staying below zero for their Sunday afternoon highs. Kotzebue Sound area should be warmer in the teens there. In the 20s to 30s for the Norton Sound area, again warmer farther to the south. Savunga getting up to 16 degrees Sunday afternoon. Southwest Alaska in the 30s, mid to upper 30s primarily, and then around 40 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 30s for the Aleutian Islands, getting colder as we get farther to the west once again, Shimmy at 32, and then St. Paul there at 36 degrees. Morning low temperatures on Monday are going to be in the lower 30s for much of the southern portions of the Panhandle, mid to upper 20s for northern locations, including 28 at Yakutat. South Central Alaska, mid-30s along the North Gulf Coast, around 30 degrees for Cook Inlet areas, in the 20s for more interior locations. In the interior of the state, we're going to see a mixture of teens and 20s for southern locations, dropping down or getting colder as we get farther to the north, single digits to the Brooks Range with the Arctic Village down to -3. Up along the Arctic coastline, minus teens are expected. Kotzebue Sound area near 10 degrees, in the 20s for Norton Sound area, and then near 30 degrees all throughout southwest Alaska. Mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and then getting colder as we get farther to the west once again. Much of the Aleutians are going to be near 30. Monday afternoon highs starting off in the Panhandle area in the lower 40s for southern locations, upper 30s as we get farther to the north. In the 40s for much of south central Alaska, Valdez staying a little bit colder, only getting up to 37 degrees. In the interior, southern locations are going to get into the 40s as well, and then the 30s as we get farther to the north. However, along the Arctic coastline, staying in the single digits. Mid to upper 20s for the Kotzebue Sound area, mid 30s for the Norton Sound area, 23 for Savunga. Southwest Alaska, mid to upper 30s are expected, near 40 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula, and then in the mid to upper 30s for much of the Aleutian Islands, with AKwx getting up to 32 degrees, and then 31 degrees expected for St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Sunday morning. We can see the front that has been pushing through the Bering Sea is going to make it to the west coast, bringing IFR conditions from the Norton Sound area down through the Bristol Bay area, as well as the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Out through the Gulf of Alaska, we'll see some IFR conditions, with some MVFR conditions approaching the North Gulf coastline. Through much of the eastern portions of mainland Alaska, as well as down in the Panhandle, we do expect VFR conditions. And then up along the Arctic coastline, primarily MVFR with some isolated IFR. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, we do expect primarily MVFR conditions, also with some isolated IFR. On Sunday afternoon, more MVFR and IFR conditions for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, and then along the west coast of the state, we will have IFR conditions continuing to extend up from Kodiak Island through the southwest area, up the west coast of the state into the Kotzebue Sound area, as well as portions of the Brooks Range. Up along the Arctic coast, we do expect VFR conditions, and then in the interior, a mixture of VFR and MVFR are expected. South Central Alaska will see primarily MVFR with some isolated VFR until we get along the North Gulf coastline, where we do expect IFR conditions to extend down the North Gulf coast towards the Yakutat area. For the Panhandle area, primarily MVFR conditions with some isolated VFR conditions for southern locations. On Monday morning, we're going to see VFR in southern portions of the Panhandle, with conditions diminishing as we get farther to the north, where we will see IFR conditions as we get to the farthest northern locations, as well as all the way along the North Gulf Coast to the Kenai Peninsula area, with the rest of South Central Alaska seeing a mixture of VFR and MVFR conditions. Up through the interior, VFR conditions out east diminishing as we move farther to the west, IFR conditions along the southern portions of the Brooks Range, and then primarily MVFR up along the Arctic coast. Down all the west coast of the state, we do expect widespread IFR conditions down through the Bristol Bay area and through much of the central and eastern portions of the Bering. The rest of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we are seeing primarily MVFR conditions Monday morning. For Monday afternoon, a mixture of MVFR and IFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutians, as well as much of the west coast of the state, where we'll start to see more of the IFR conditions by St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula area, as well as Kotzebue Sound. We'll see some MVFR conditions up along the Arctic coastline, and then eastern portions of the interior, primarily VFR, and then dropping down again as we move farther to the west. South Central Alaska will see a mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions primarily, with some isolated areas of VFR, especially for the Copper River Basin. North Gulf coastline is still going to see primarily IFR conditions, as well as the northern portions of the Panhandle. And then conditions will improve as we get farther to the south, with VFR conditions in the most southern locations of the Panhandle. Through the passes on Sunday, and Aktivik will be VFR dropping down to marginal conditions in the afternoon, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark will start off MVFR and then drop down to IFR. However, Merrill will stay MVFR throughout the day on Sunday. Rainy Pass should be MVFR all day Sunday. Windy Pass will start off VFR and then drop down to MVFR conditions. Isabel Pass should be VFR all day Sunday, as well as at Mentasta. Antonina will start off VFR but drop down to MVFR in the afternoon. Portage will start off MVFR, dropping all the way to IFR in the afternoon. And then Chilkoot and White will both start off with VFR conditions, dropping down to marginal later in the day. For our surface freezing line, we do have that moving through the Panhandle area, then through the northern Gulf of Alaska, out through southwest Alaska, and through the central Bering Sea. We have some warmer air coming up by Kodiak Island, with freezing levels up to as high as 2,000 feet there, and with some higher freezing levels farther to the south. For our icing along the west coast of the state, below 10,000 feet by the Seward Peninsula, above 2,000 feet for the southwestern portions of the state, below 10,000 feet for areas around Cook Inlet. As we get out over the Gulf waters, above 3,000 feet, and then below 9,000 for the Panhandle area. Throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, primarily below 9,000 feet is expected on Sunday. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is over the far Arctic coastline, westerly winds up to as high as 105 knots. 85 knots out of the southwest near Cook Inlet, and 75 knots out of the northwest for the Panhandle. Down to 9,000 feet, strongest winds are going to be right through south central Alaska, as well as out by the McGrath area. Southerly winds up to as high as 80 knots, dropping down towards 50 knots by much of the rest of south central. Out over the Aleutians, we're going to see primarily westerly winds 35 knots, but northerly winds 60 knots by the western Aleutians. Weaker winds out by the Panhandle area, getting up to as high as 25 knots out of the northwest and southern portions of the Panhandle. Down to 3,000 feet, calmer winds over the Panhandle area. Strongest winds are going to be north of the low that's out over the northern Bering, up to as high as 80 knots out of the east. Down much of the western portion of the state, we're going to see southerly winds 45 to 50 knots, 60 knots by the Prince William Sound area. Then out over Bering Sea and Aleutians, west to northwest winds 30 to 40 knots, strongest by the eastern Aleutians. For our turbulence, quite a bit of turbulence throughout the Aleutian Islands. Below 3,000 feet is expected. Below 5,000 feet for the Kodiak Island area through much of southwest Alaska and south central Alaska. Then up by the Norton Sound area as well as Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound, below 3,000 feet is expected up there.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery.
Okay.
We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human. So the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time. So the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there. and can actually pick some of this ash up
Right.
off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community. So thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Gina at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.gina.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. With that system that we have coming up in the Bering Sea, we have seen some retreat of the ice throughout the Bering. However, as we move closer towards Wednesday, we will see a return to the cold and northerly winds, especially west of St. Matthew Island, where we do expect the ice edge to extend and grow out another 30 to 50 nautical miles. Again, that's going to be primarily west of St. Matthew Island. In the Cook Inlet area, we are still seeing some thinning and melting of the ice due to the April sun, in spite of the air temperatures staying very cold. Looking out in southeast Alaska for Sunday in the inside waters, we have variable winds 5 to 10 knots in central and southern locations, and then northerly winds 15 knots up in the northern areas. Out over the Gulf waters in the eastern portions, we have southerly winds 10 to 15 knots, and then picking up and becoming more easterly as we move farther to the north, 25 knots near Yakutat, and then eventually 35 knots out of the east in the northern Gulf. For Monday in the Gulf waters, northerly locations 30 to 35 knots out of a southeasterly direction, seas up to as high as 14 feet. In the eastern Gulf, 20 to 25 knots out of the south. In the inside waters, we do have southerly winds 10 to 20 knots with the stronger winds in the central and northern locations. For Sunday in south central Alaska, in the Gulf waters, we have east to southeast winds 35 to 40 knots up north and 40 to 45 knots as we get closer towards Kenai Peninsula. West of the Barren Islands, easterly winds 45 knots with seas up to as high as 19 feet. In Cook Inlet, northeasterly winds 30 to 35 knots, and then Prince William Sound, easterly winds of 35 knots expected. On Monday, wind's going to die down quite a bit in Cook Inlet, east to southeast winds 10 to 15 knots. Southeast winds 15 knots around the Barren Islands area, and then picking up as we get into the northern Gulf, southeast winds 35 to 40 knots, and southeast 30 as we get into Prince William Sound with the barrier jet over these locations. On Sunday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, around Kodiak Island, southeast winds 30 to 35 knots. On the Bering side, we are going to see southwest winds 25 knots near Cold Bay, but in Bristol Bay, southeast winds 40 knots. On the Pacific side, southeast winds 35 knots near Chignik, and then southwest 25 by Sand Point. As we move into Monday around Kodiak Island, south winds 15 knots, picking up to 20 knots as we get closer towards Chignik, then southwest winds 20 knots near Sand Point. On the Bering side, we're going to see south to southeast winds 15 knots expected. For the Aleutian Islands, on Sunday we are going to see southwest winds 30 knots by the eastern Aleutians, westerly winds 30 knots by the central Aleutians, and then west to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots for the western Aleutians. On Monday, still going to see mostly westerly winds, west to southwest winds 25 knots for the western Aleutians, northwest winds 25 knots for the central Aleutians, and then westerly winds 20 to 25 knots for the eastern Aleutian Islands. Up along the west coast of the state, we can really see where our low pressure system is to the southwest of Nunavik Island, where we have westerly winds 25 knots by the Pribilof Islands, southerly winds 30 knots south of Nunavik Island. North of Nunavik Island, southeast winds 15 knots, and then by St. Matthew Island, easterly winds 25 knots. Up by St. Lawrence Island, northeast winds 45 knots expected, and easterly winds 30 knots in Norton Sound. For Monday, the low is going to move up closer towards St. Lawrence Island area, where we'll see south to southeast winds 25 knots between St. Lawrence Island and Nunavik Island. St. Matthew Island, northwest winds 30 knots, south of Nunavik Island 20 knots at southerly direction, and then the Pribilof Islands, westerly winds 20 knots expected. Norton Sound area, southeast winds 20 knots. Up along the Arctic coast, we're going to see southwest winds 10 knots. Down the west coast of the state, we're going to start with easterly winds 20 knots near Point Lake, but picking up to 30 to 35 knots out of a northeasterly direction as we move closer towards the Bering Strait. And then south of the Bering Strait, northeast winds 45 knots expected. On Monday, along the Arctic coast, easterly winds 25 knots expected. Down the northwest coast, northeast winds 25 knots, becoming westerly 20 knots as we get closer to Kivalina, and then 25 knots out of a southeasterly direction that's south of the strait. Quick recap of tonight's weather. We have a big frontal system moving into the west coast of the state, producing a lot of snow from the Yukon Delta area up through this Seward Peninsula area and out into western portions of the interior. We are going to see quite a few warnings and advisories out for snow and blowing snow in these locations. That's going to extend up into the Kotzebue Sound as well as we move into tomorrow. We're going to see some snow for south central Alaska as well as along the North Gulf Coast and in some areas around the Panhandle. A mix of rain and snow for the eastern Aleutian Islands, and then snow for the central and western. As we move into Sunday, we can see that snow push farther up to the north through Kotzebue Sound as well as much of the interior and Brooks Range. More blowing snow through much of the west coast until we get to the southwest coast where it will be a little bit warmer. Mix of rain and snow expected there. We're also going to see continued snow throughout south central and northern portions of the Panhandle. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.